Welcome to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Our mission is to bring you discussions on a wide array of topics in the coaching world to grow players on and off the court. You can connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, and also reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Now, here's your host, Coach Mike Hernandez.
Welcome back, everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining us here for another episode, wherever in the world you're listening to us from, whatever platform you're listening to us on. As always, thank you so much for the support. Thank you so much for sharing this show and for the kind, positive messages that you guys have left. They all mean very, very much to me. I really, really appreciate those. Today, we're going to talk about coaching freshmen. I know a lot of you listening are varsity coaches, but even if you are a varsity coach, you have a freshman program. And I wanted to dedicate an episode specifically talking about the freshman program because there's a lot, while similar to coaching, JV and varsity, there are some unique situations and challenges that come with teaching and coaching and working with ninth graders, those 14 and 15-year-olds. So we're going to kind of get into that today and talk about some of the interesting nuances that come with coaching a freshman team and how you coach them kind of individually, how you coach them within the frame of the whole entire program, and get an interesting conversation going. So if you're a varsity coach, this would be a really interesting episode to kind of reflect on, your freshman program and maybe some things you see that are similar or maybe different. And then those of you who might be interested in coaching, maybe you will end up coaching at the freshman level, and this episode might be really beneficial to you. So I know that everybody will get something out of this, so I'm really excited to get into it. My guest to discuss this topic is a freshman basketball coach, among other titles that he has as well. My guest today is the ninth grade basketball coach at Plainview, Elgin, Millville High School, Coach Michael Veenhuis. Coach, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, this is a real interesting, unique perspective here, coaching at the freshman level. There's kind of nothing like that. I speak as one who coached at that level myself, so I kind of know how the game sort of goes. So, Coach, let's go ahead and get started with your journey, your basketball journey, your coaching journey. Where did that take you, and what were the twists and turns that got you to where you are right now?
Well, I started coaching my junior year of high school with a buddy of mine. We coached sixth grade boys, and we just leave practice from wherever we were and then head right to sixth grade practice, which that was a lot of fun. And then I took a few years off, was in college, and I got a text from who's now one of my mentors saying he put my name in to be the eighth grade coach. And I got a Facebook message a week before the season from the varsity coach, Jason Herber. And he asked me if I wanted to do it. And I was pushed by some friends of mine telling me to do it. So I decided to do eighth grade, did that for 2 years. Last year, a week into the season, I moved up to ninth grade because the JV coach resigned. So then I took over for ninth grade. And I also this summer coached AAU, some JV girls, and JV and varsity boys as well for PEM.
So you have kind of had everything. It almost seems like you've kind of been in all different facets of the game. And I wanted to actually touch on the fact that one of the things I knew going into this was that in addition to coaching ninth grade, you also coach AAU as well. And I'm really curious about that experience. Since you have experience coaching both, what is similar in your approach with how you coach and teach and work with your freshmen and your AAU players? And then also in what ways have you had to sort of like change up your coaching style or differ the way that you go about coaching both of those groups?
Yeah, well, for AAU, I was never a fan of it. Just, going to games or watching highlight clips, you would never see a fast break where you could do like throw a ball off the backboard and dunk it. Like everyone hustles back in school ball, and I was never a fan of that. But the AAU team I coached for was actually ran by the varsity coach who I coached for, and I knew it was ran the right way. the team played the right way. So when he asked me to coach last year, I was all for it. And similarities, I guess it's this year I'm transitioning into more of player development for ninth grade, and that's what I do for AAU. I texted all the coaches of the guys from different teams that I have and asked them what I could do to help them improve this summer to get them prepared for the winter. Because if they're playing for me, I don't want them to play, or I don't want them to do what I say to do.
Sure.
From a off-season standpoint, like I want to help them. I'm not here to just win tournaments and look like a winning coach. Like I really want them to improve. So that was actually a lot of fun to talk to their coaches and see what their kids needed to improve on. And so yeah, the player development part is going to be huge for ninth grade as well. So that'll be similar. But the difference is you can't really prepare for an AAU team because you have no idea who you're going to play. Compared to ninth grade, you play conference teams or section teams, and you have a pretty good idea of what they're going to run for offense and defense. So for AAU, we really just kind of practice what we're good at, and we touch on our defense. For AAU, I run a trapping 2-3. It looks a lot like a man, but I'm not a fan of zone, but that zone defense that Coach Herbert created is very, very fun if they're running it properly and hustling and getting after the ball. And so that's just how I approach AAU, is just really player development and just hammering home what we're good at and improving at that aspect. For ninth grade, if we're playing a team that runs a 1-2-2 zone, I'll have them the day before or the week before, whatever it may be, depending on how long of a break we have. We'll work on a zone offense and practice that, and we'll do a lot of game preparation for ninth grade, depending on who we're playing. I like to hammer home I like to have teams defend us. I want to really be great at what we're good at and what we run. But for AAU, yeah, there's a lot of differences from that aspect.
And kind of like going along with that, I know that you mentioned like a big emphasis for you is on the aspect of player development and getting players developed and building up their skill sets. And so that maybe leads into the answer you're going to give for this next question. But as somebody who coaches freshmen, how do you define success? What does success sort of look like to you for your freshman team? What does that definition look like for you?
I would say them being prepared for JV and varsity, because our JV and varsity practices together, and their practices are really intense, and I want them to be as ready as possible for that. Now it's going to be different for ninth grade because we're really implementing the program, teaching them our offense, teaching them our two defenses, our press breaks. So it's a lot more slowed down from that aspect. But if they know the program, like our X's and O's, our offense, our defense, when they get to that first week of practice, I feel as if I succeeded from that standpoint. But a couple more things that I really want them to be ready for is knowing their roles. I think role players are very huge at all levels, 7 through 12 especially. But ninth grade is really where they need to learn how to play the game to how it suits them, because in ninth grade they're still at that age where they think they can score whenever and they can kind of do it themselves. And I don't agree with that. And sometimes that's a tough conversation to have with them, but it's important to have, and it will prepare them for when they get up there and JV, and maybe they're not playing as much as they'd like at the beginning, but if they know their role and they can succeed at their role, they'll find themselves getting put in important situations and getting more minutes nearing the middle and the end of the year compared to the beginning.
Yeah.
Which
And
is, yeah.
And so, just kind of like going along with that, just curious in terms of your program and the experiences that you've had, the transition that the players have to make as they're kind of going from middle school to freshman year. Have you found in your experience coaching the ninth graders that is that a difficult transition? Just is there any sort of like maturity issues or any things that you really have to kind of work through as they kind of even make that leap from, seventh and eighth grade to ninth grade, or has that been pretty smooth?
Well, so last year's team that I took over for, I had them the year before, so I
Yeah.
knew what I was getting myself into with that group.
Mm-hmm.
This off season, there was some challenges because that was their first look at how JV kind of works. We had a couple tournaments where we had enough guys for varsity. So some of those guys that were playing varsity went down to JV, and it was tough for a couple of them to adjust to the role. But when they did, their improvements was incredible from the beginning of the season to the end. And it really showed in our last tournament how much if they're willing to buy in and they're willing to listen, it really shows on the court the improvements they can make.
Yeah, you kind of have to, especially, in that freshman year, or even if they're going to make that leap from freshman to JV, like they really have to kind of buy in and really get dialed in order to make that leap, because as you mentioned, the way that the practices are even structured, you mentioned up at the JV and varsity level, I think you mentioned that they're pretty intense, and they're like another level of intensity, so they got to be ready to like make that transition. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And the speed's completely different every year, from 9 to JV to varsity. And they noticed that this summer, just how the game changes. And when they're playing AAU as well, how the game is played for AAU is just so much different than school basketball, where you're going to score a lot more on AAU because defense is just a little lazier and it's not as disciplined. And then when you get to school basketball and they're with their head coaches and the guys that really know the program, you're going to start noticing their pressure defense is a lot more tough to get by. Their help defense is a lot better. You're not going to see the open driving lanes that some could have in AAU, and it was an adjustment for them to make, but they did eventually.
And going along with that adjustment, we talked a little bit about that, the intensity and everything from going from freshman year up to JV and then going up to varsity. In terms of the X's and O's aspect of things that you run, how much of what you do as a freshman coach is directly meant to get them ready for the system that they're going to be in for JV and varsity? Is it a direct pipeline there that they're going to? Do you is the foundation laid freshman year and then it kind of builds up from that, or what does that sort of look like in an X's and O's way?
Well, so last year when I took over, when I had that group in 8th grade, it was really hammering home what they're going to be running in 9th grade, JV, and varsity, because 9 through 12 runs the same offense, the same defenses. Sometimes a press break will look different, but for the most part, our varsity coach really wants them running what he runs, because that's what they're going to be doing as they get older. And so when they were in 8th grade, I really worked on our offense. That was the first step, teaching them the 5-out motion. Kind of started with the passing and cutting aspect, when to backdoor, when to curl, when to do all those random cuts that you can do in that, and teaching them how to time it. And then halfway through the year, we started working on the screening away. But when you get to that halfway point of the season, it feels like there's 3 games and 1 practice a week, and it's really tough to hammer that home. And so last year when I found out I was taking over, I kind of steered away from the passing and cutting. We worked on it a little bit here and there, but I worked on more of the pass and screen away and what to do if you could screen for, or if you're going to screen away and you notice the guy is opening up his jersey, you sprint down and cut and all that. And they started getting it. We started off the year 0-4, and then we ended up finishing the year 6-9. But COVID really or screwed us up last year. We had 2 outbreaks, and our first one, we had everyone was quarantined except for me because I didn't play. And then the second outbreak, we were missing, I think, 7 of our 11 guys. So I had to bring up a couple 8th graders, and we had to bring down a 10th grader, and it was a mess at the end of the year, but it worked out really well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you gotta do the best you can. I think everybody was kind of in that position last year of just trying to survive, for sure. And so it's really interesting then, as a freshman coach, and I think sometimes the higher levels you coach, and if you've coached, a varsity level for a long time, sometimes you forget, like, for you as a freshman coach, you have to be very patient in terms of
Yes.
of the way things are executed, and mistakes, and trying to understand, okay, these mistakes are going to happen because they're only, at 8th grade, and then they come up to 9th grade. There's going to be a lot of trials and a lot of error that is going to take place there. So this just came to my head now about, for you personally, how do you sort of like keep yourself like on track and keep yourself focused and not let yourself like completely fall apart, for a lack of a better term, when you see all the mistakes and all the growing pains that your team is going through?
Yeah, well, I have to be more patient still. I'm very passionate, and sometimes that gets the best of me. I think my best piece of coaching was when we had all those outbreaks, and nearing the last 2 weeks, I really just was patient with them, and setting them up, trying to set them up to win. But if they didn't, I kept my head level and all that, and I need to be like that more. And this year especially, I really started to like realize, nobody's gonna remember their freshman year record when they graduate. Nobody's gonna look back and say, well, they went 6-9 their freshman year, because the only thing people remember is if you're holding up a section title or a state title even. So I'm reminding myself about that, and I really want to make sure they're prepared. So with every year, there's gonna be growing pains. One group could be very good at the offensive aspect, but the defensive aspect, maybe they're poor at help defense. So we'll hammer that home, and I'll know that there's going to be some difficulties with that, and just slowly but surely building up until the end of the year, where hopefully we're at the point where they could compete against the JV team, maybe, or at least, we're winning a majority of our games. Also watching film, it was really nice not nice, but COVID, we were able to have our games streamed. So I was able to go back and watch every game when we were done. And in the heat of the moment, you don't notice the improvements, but then when you're able to sit down and, you're not in the coaching mode anymore, you're more of in the teaching mode or the learning mode. And you're able to really notice how some of the improvements you've made from game 1 to game 12.
Yeah.
So that's very beneficial for me, especially.
And I think one of the hardest parts, I know for me, when I coached freshmen, was they'd make improvements, right, from game 1 to game 12, but then you still see where they're at game 12, and it's nowhere near like where you still want them to be. But you have to remember, like, wait a minute, I know where they were at game 1, and this is miles ahead of where they were. Even if I'm look at this and I'm like, this isn't that good at all, but it is, like you said, it's an improvement. And you can't, as you just mentioned, you can't measure success, especially at that level, a freshman level, by wins and losses. You have to really look at kind of like the big picture. And it sounds like that's something that's important to you, is, the big picture of what are my players doing. And I think, as you mentioned earlier, right, like, am I putting them in a position so that they're ready to play at the next level in the future?
Exactly. Yeah. That's important because, everyone wants to win. I want to win just as bad as they do, if not more sometimes, I feel like. But as long as they're improving, and by the time they get to JV, and they'll have some good players with them the next year where they can really adjust, and then they'll start winning more. Then they'll forget all about their 6-9 record, So
Yeah.
and this summer coaching them, it was just fun to see them from our first tournament where we lost a game 54-12 to the end of the year winning our last tournament. That was really like that showed them how much potential they have. And and you can see them, they're processing the game differently. They're noticing different things that they're not noticing from the first day of ninth grade practice to the last tournament in the summer, which is always one of the best feelings, to see them make that backdoor cut or screen or slip screen or whatever it may be.
Yeah, and yeah, you're absolutely right. I think one of the cool things too, I remember of coaching like freshmen is when you see them, like even if it's like a couple years later, or like you mentioned, like if it's like a tournament later on, or you see players later on, you see like how far it is that they got, or they have success, right? Like at the varsity level, and you're like, all right, like it really was tough when we were, losing or struggling freshman year, but I know this is a distant memory now because like look where I was able to get you. So you have to almost, at least I found, and I feel like you're kind of the same way, like you're really competitive, but you almost have to really almost kind of check your ego a little bit, or really
Yeah.
kind of pull yourself back and kind of look at big picture and see like where they're going to be in the future. And that's tough because, you want to win, you want to be successful, but almost in a certain way, you almost have to define success of like, where are these players at a few years from now? And like, did I do my part to like get them there is kind of how I
Yeah.
tried to think about it, which, it's still tough because, right, you want to win in the moment for sure.
Yeah,
Um,
exactly.
so talk a little bit, you talked a little about X's and O's and kind of like building that up, setting the foundation and getting them ready for, the more complicated nuances of, the system that you run. But in terms of like your coaching philosophy, what is the program philosophy that you're in at PEM, and what do you have to work in with your freshmen to kind of get them integrated into the culture and into kind of the more non-basketball related things about, here you're in ninth grade, like this is what you need to do in order to, be successful long-term in this program? What's kind of the culture building aspects that you have to work on with those younger players?
Yeah, our varsity coach's mission statement is everybody doing their job for the betterment of the team. And basically we're all one. From 7 through 12, we are all one team. The name on the front of the jersey is more important than the name on the back to us, because when you have that Bulldog name on the front, you're representing the school. So for me, that means I have to hold all the players accountable, whether that's our top guy or our bottom guy. If they're not playing the game the right way, or if they're not acting the right way, they're not going to play. So that means if my top player turns it over, and he walks back on defense, I'm not pulling him out for the turnover. I can live with turnovers. That happens. But if you're not hustling back and playing the game the right way to try and at least slow them down, or at least contest the fast break layup, then that shows me that you're not ready to take that next step, and you need to sit with me until I feel you're ready. Accountability is huge, especially at the ninth grade level, because you can kind of break those bad habits they get from 7th and 8th grade. And just being able to have the players become accountable for themselves too. Last year, the beginning of the year was a little difficult, but nearing the end, I had one player specifically. He was a little bit of a challenge, but his heart is huge. And he's one of the more competitive players. And nearing the end of the year, he's came out and he said, "I'm sorry about that turnover." And I was like, "Don't be sorry, but like, what did you learn from it?" And he told me exactly what he needed to do. And that's when you realize, like, okay, now they're starting to take the steps and they're learning and they're ready to move on to the next level.
Yeah, and and I can imagine being in that sort of situation of, even if it's just you like asking them that question or kind of probing to figure out if they knew like what they did wrong or what they need to fix. I can imagine that that may be like the first time a coach maybe has ever really asked them that, or like you're kind of having that conversation, and maybe that player, at a eighth or ninth grade level has never really been asked or really given, had to give a response to something like that. So even them having to like answer a question like that might be like a completely new experience that they got to learn and kind of work through as well.
Yeah, it is. And they had their first like film session. We had a day where we came off a bad loss and they were struggling in that game. The team we played runs a really, really disciplined 1-2-2, and we struggle against it. But I was able to sit them down in a film session and kind of show them, this is what's going to be open. Like if the ball is on the right wing, the left side short corner should flash to the block because the ball is moving and they're moving to where the ball is. And they started seeing like if their defender turns their head, that's when they need to cut to the hoop. And a lot of them, a couple of them took notes, and I was able to read through them, and that was really cool to see their thought process. One kid drew Humpty Dumpty on a wall. That was very funny. I got a lot of humor out of that, but he was a little distracted, I think. But yeah, it's cool to see. It's just a lot of like fun and cool to see them learn the game and be able to tell you what they're seeing and how it kind of aligns with what you're seeing as well.
And just to kind of take that like one step further from my previous point, and I'll ask you about that in your experience. You might be in a position where when you get these players, you might be one of the first coaches that actually is kind of teaching them like how to play or really like think about what's happening on the court. They may have had, at younger levels experiences where they're just kind of told what to do, or they're just kind of maybe told plays or told about how to do certain things, but not necessarily the why. So are you in a position maybe where you're one of the first people who's actually like kind of teaching them kind of the nuances and the why of the game? Is that part of your responsibility as well?
Um, to an extent, our
Mm.
middle school coaches are very good.
Oh,
They
that's awesome. That works
Yeah,
too.
I think we have one of those few coaching staffs that are 7 through 12 really on the same page. And that starts with the varsity coach. He does a great job of, you know, I want it, I want us to be all on the same page. And he gives us the freedom to try new things, but he also is very consistent with, I want us to run 5 out because players can kind of perform in a way that suits best for them in that offense. So that's really good to have. When they come from 5th and 6th grade where we are, they play man defense and they can't play help side. So they have to stay on their guy. They weren't able to switch off of ball screens or anything, and they can't run zone. So 7th and 8th grade, they do a great job of kind of getting them prepared for the 2-3s that they might see, or a 1-2-2, teaching them press breaks and that. So for me, and they put in the offense as well, which is nice. But 5 out it's not complicated, but there's a lot of moving parts with it where you
Mhm.
can you're cutting, you're screening away your ball screens. So I'm trying to teach them, when to screen or ball screen compared to cutting, or when to do a backdoor cut instead of just the normal like front cut where they're cutting in front of the defender. Um, I I mean, to an extent, yes, but no at the same time, because our JV coaches or our junior high coaches are great. Like
And that's
they're
that's huge. If you can
yeah,
have that where they're doing a great job and they're, really building that up, man, I feel like there's so much that can be gained, and so much where it's like, oh, I don't have to, explicitly go over this, and I can just get into, whatever other actions we need to run or whatever other things we need to do in practice. So, like, I can't even imagine how much time that would save if you have like quality middle school coaches. And I think that, for those in kind of that traditional, 9 to 12 situation. I think if they have the ability to, talk to some of the middle school coaches or get with them and get on the same page, you'll probably, as a freshman coach or just a high school coach in general, probably save so much time if you're able to kind of have those conversations with your middle school coaches and kind of get them on board with what you're doing.
Yeah, and our varsity coach, we do like monthly coaches meetings, and then in the season we're going to do weekly, which is, I think, very beneficial and very nice, because then we can all kind of, if what the 7th grade team struggling with this aspect of man defense, or the 8th grade team struggling with how to screen away in motion or 5-out motion, our varsity coach he's the best basketball mind I've been around, and he can fix things very quickly. Like his in-game adjustments is some of the best I've seen, and he's great. Like he's very helpful to have, and it's great having a varsity coach that not only cares about the JV and the varsity, but he cares about the 9th grade. And we're up till, because I work overnight, so I'm texting him till 2 or 3 a.m. and we're talking about how can we help the varsity, and he's helping me with how I can fix 9th grade. And he really lets all of his coaches really put their opinions out there as well, which is nice. But ultimately, just being on the same page is huge. And like you said, being able to have the team come up and, at least understand what we're going to run and what we're going to do is very huge, because then you can kind of hammer home like some of these other moving parts compared to, I don't need to teach them when to passing and cutting, and I don't need to teach them ball screens and all that jazz.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking of the time that could save, if you can just say something and boom, it gets done, and you can just focus on other things. No, that's fantastic. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but just to ask it more specifically for you, I'm going to focus on this one more on like in-game situations where this balance between, freshman level is about development and the growth of players and, getting them ready for the next step. Because like we said, nobody really cares about what your freshman record is. But how do you kind of balance as you're coaching in a game that desire of like, hey, like we're in a situation, let's go win this, versus putting players in positions where they're going to grow, even if, they're going to struggle and make mistakes? As you're coaching in game, how do you sort of balance that? Because like you said, I know you're somebody who's competitive. So what's that kind of like for you?
Yeah. It really depends. Last year, I think we had, except for like 2 games, I think our losses were by 5 or less or 6 or less. So being in situations like that, and when you really want to win and we're struggling to get one, my competitiveness sometimes will get the best of me. Now, nearing the end of the year, when I had to put in some of these guys that were not playing as much, I realized I should have been playing them more, because they know their role better than anyone, and they're going to do anything it takes to not just show me, but to show others like, hey, I can play. And they may not be a great scorer by any means, but they will dive after that loose ball. They'll box out that kid, things that don't come up on the stat sheet necessarily, but you notice on film. So that's how I'm going to approach this year. If it's a 4-point game and there's 2 minutes left, and my top guy turns it over and he walks back, he's sitting on the bench, because that will show them that I want the game to be played the right way, and I want them to hold themselves accountable, but I want them to learn, and I want them to also hustle back and get after that ball. Just because you turn it over doesn't mean you can't get it back. And that'll help them for when they get on JV. And if it's an end of game situation, then they won't do that again. I can take a loss. I'm fine with that. As long as they're being successful at the varsity level, I feel I played a big part in that. So yeah, for end of the game situations, it really depends too. If the one time I called a timeout at the end of the game, a team completely switched up a defense they ran man against us the 2 games we played them. And then I called a timeout and they put in a 2-3. And I was like, uh-oh, because I drew up a man play.
Yeah.
So they kind of get out there and I'm like trying to direct them and it didn't work. So if it's like one of those situations where we're down 2 and there's 20 seconds left and they don't call a timeout, I don't call a timeout, because that's also where they learn the most. Being able to control themselves and having that, if you're in those pressure moments, it can get very tough. Now, if I have a timeout left and the ball is kind of being passed around and it's a little sloppy, then I'll call one to get them, calm down. And I'm going to tell them, you got to be ready for a 2-3. You got to be ready for a different defense.
Sure.
If so, let's just move the ball quickly, find the gap and get a shot if you're open. If it's man, then I'll draw up a play for them if I have to, or I am going to start putting in set plays that we may not run until the end of the game situation, but at least they'll know it. So I can call it out instead of having to call that timeout.
Yeah. And I think there's a lot of really interesting like learning curves with that. And I think one of the interesting things I found as a freshman coach, and it seems like you've kind of been in that situation, I'll let you talk about it as well, is when you're faced with some new things, right? If a team, like you said, like kind of throws a zone at you or out of a timeout, or there's a new adjustment that a coach makes. And I remember thinking that as a freshman coach coaching at a younger level, that I could just say, a couple things on the court and we'll be able to make like a quick adjustment. But then I realized, like, wait a minute, this experience that they're in, this is very new to them. And so I have to almost like over communicate, or in a sense, maybe I got to wait for a dead ball or call a timeout and have to really explain some of the certain things that are going on. I think that's one of the more interesting challenges, is that the way that you sometimes have to communicate to your players has to change a lot, especially if they're in situations that maybe they've never faced before. And you can't just necessarily say 1 or 2 words and they're ready to pick it up and figure it out. I know I had that experience, and it sounds like in a sense you maybe have gone through that as well.
Yeah, because coaching some of these higher level groups, and also the first team, 8th grade team I coached, the varsity coach's son's on that team, and they've been running the same offense and the same defense since they were in 4th grade. So they were very disciplined, and they knew how to adjust. Compared to the next year, they didn't know our offense, so I had to teach them, and I had to overcoach. And last year I did a pretty poor job of letting them kind of make their own adjustments to what they're good at. Sure. And I need to be better about that. There's times where, like you said, you have to overcoach, and that's just how it is. You kind of have to almost get a film session in to show them, this is what's going to be open. This is when you cut or whatever it may be. But that's why I like the 5-out offense, because they can kind of play the game in a way that they can be successful at. Like we have this kid this year coming to 9th grade, and he's 6'3", 240. He's a big boy, and there's not a lot of big boys like that from my area. And I really am going to work with him this year on how can I help you to play it in a style that will benefit you in the game. And then the player development stuff will happen at practice. Like we'll help him adjust to his footwork and his body, because when you grow so quickly, it's hard to get coordination. He's pretty coordinated for the most part, but you're gonna look awkward at points. It's gonna be tough. And so I really want to work with them on showing that. I'll have probably a film session 1 day a week or 2 days a week where we can sit down and really show them the game and slow it down for them, to show them, this is where you cut, this is when you screen away or whatever it may be. And then in a game, I'll let them kind of try and figure it out for themselves. And if I have to, I'll call a timeout and I'll tell them, we're passing and cutting too much. Let's give them a different look, so they're not getting so comfortable and packing down in the lane and taking our passing lanes away.
And I think something that's really interesting that just came up with one of the answers you mentioned when it comes to like kind of like teaching the players the game, and players who are coming in and at 14, 15 years old, uh, physically, they're going to be different people when they are seniors. And some of them, as we know, kind of go through like these growth spurts and they get taller. And then all of a sudden, they go from being, 5'10" to now they're like 6'2" or 6'3", or maybe the position that they're going to have to play in completely changes. And I think that one of the things that seems like it's really important to you, and I know I tried my best to do, was if we teach our players the game the right way at the freshman level, we kind of get them ready for whatever situation they may find themselves in later down the road, especially as their body changes and things change around them, that you can't necessarily like pigeonhole like your freshman as a point guard, if all of a sudden they grow like 6 inches and it's like, well, somebody else is a point guard and you got to, play something else.
Yeah, exactly. And, I'm going to really work on ball handling with everyone.
Yeah.
I'm going to work on post moves with everyone. Because when I was a freshman, I was like 4'11", and JV, I was like 5'2", 5'3". And then all of a sudden my senior year, I'm 6'1". So I didn't know a post move, but I was one of the taller ones now. And I'm sitting here having to learn how to guard taller guys and how to play, like be able to get up and get those rebounds, and also be able to, get into the post. And if I have a smaller defender on me, I didn't even really know how to do a drop step because I was so used to having to get to the hoop off the dribble or be a spot up shooter type of player. So having 1 through 10 or however many guys is on the roster, all of them being able to handle the ball and being able to work in the post is going to be very important, especially with how the game's changed since I was in high school, and that wasn't too long ago. I'm only 23. So, but it's just crazy how when I was a senior, we played against some zones, but not a lot. Now I'm starting to see a lot of 1-2-2s, and the way the three ball has really changed the way you coach is kind of crazy.
Yeah, it's really interesting how much the game changes even when you get out of it, and it's like, wait a minute, I barely even recognize this game. Like, we still playing the same game here? Like, what is this defense, or what are some of the things that are changing on offense? And just for me, even like the spacing and the way the game is just even opened up. I graduated high school in 2009, but even from then to now, like how much more open the game is. And like you said, like everybody kind of in a way has to be a ball handler. Everyone has to kind of know their position. If you're running a 5-out or you're running like positionless basketball, like there's a lot of differences, and there's a lot of things that you got to be kind of ready for and be able to adjust for. And I think that, as we talked about, if you step into that like freshman role, you have to really know like what the players need and what they need in order to be successful at the varsity level. And you can't really go into it with thinking about how the game was when you were playing it, because it's a lot different now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And speaking of which, I was curious to circle back to that, because this also popped in my head, talking about the layering from players their freshman year all the way up to their varsity year. I want to talk about like you as a coach and how you kind of fit within the overall picture of your coaching staff. How involved are you with the coaching and the program as a whole? I know that you mentioned how you kind of practice separately from JV and varsity, but what is your kind of your role within like the overall program, not just as a freshman coach, but beyond that? How much input, how much do you guys work together? How much collaboration would you say takes place at all levels?
Yeah. Well, last year was my first year being a part of the varsity staff. And I kind of took the quiet route. I really wanted to absorb as much as I could and learn as much as I could, because the game is played so much differently from ninth grade to varsity.
Absolutely.
The speed and all of that. So I kind of sat back, and nearing the end of the year, I started getting more comfortable, trying to help out. And the varsity coach, he is like my second dad. He took me under his wing, and he's been a great mentor. And this summer, him and I really got close. His son's on my AAU team, so we're riding together to tournaments, and we're talking about the varsity team and all the programs and how we're gonna, how are we gonna build a program and sustain success to what we had last year. And this year he gave me the role to coach the varsity team, because in Minnesota, there's like this period where varsity coaches can't have contact with players.
Yeah.
So he let me coach the varsity, and I learned a lot just from that. And AAU, he's helping me out, and he's pulling me aside after tournaments and talking to me. And this year now, it's nice because usually our ninth grade practiced at the same time as our varsity, but our ninth grade will be going early, so my practice schedule will be 3 to 5 with my team, and then I'll head over to wherever they're practicing, and from 5 to 7 I'll be at the varsity practice. And from our JV and our assistant varsity coach and I, he's allowing us to, really, if we see something or if we think this isn't working, he wants us to speak up, and he really wants us to talk to him and communicate how we're feeling, because he's is a coach that looks in the mirror a lot. He knows when things aren't going well, and if he had a moment where he didn't do made a great coaching moment, he knows it and he addresses it, which is really cool to see, because sometimes just from what I've seen, there's some coaches out there that don't think they're wrong often. And he's one of those coaches that he cares about his players. He loves his players and he loves his staff, and he wants to help us, and he also wants to learn from us as well. So this year I'll have a bigger role, and I'll be more comfortable to, if I'm seeing something not work, or if our offense is stalling, I'll be willing to speak up and tell him how I feel, and he'll listen, and he'll really he'll tell me if it's wrong, or he'll tell me if it's right. And that's really nice to have, just from a quote unquote boss, but also a mentor.
Yeah. And I think that that's like so important, because, you talk about your, freshmen, as they're growing, and then they're getting up there to the the JV and the varsity level. But you yourself, you mentioned, you're kind of just starting in this profession, and it's like, in a way, it's like you're kind of growing too, right? And you're kind of trying to build yourself up and get from where you're at right now, and presumably potentially up to like another level. And so in a way, it's like you're getting coached up as well. It's kind of also the way I thought of it. I remember when I was coaching freshmen, it's like I have my freshmen I'm trying to build up, but then at the same time, I myself as a coach, I'm also trying to be built up and coached up, so I could continue to grow and continue to be the best I can be.
Yeah. And with having his son with me when he was in 8th grade, he sat with me at tournaments, because I asked him, I was like, I could use as much advice as I can get. This is my first year. I'm 19 years old, and I have a lot to learn. And every tournament, it seemed like he was teaching me something, and he didn't even realize it. The way I coach the offense now is just from sitting next to him and seeing what he's seeing and him calling it out. It was nice last year being able to sit with the varsity and kind of just absorb, because that's where I learned a lot, was being able to sit on the bench and hear how he's communicating with the players and the coaches, and hear how he's calling plays out and why he's calling it out and what he's seeing. And I mean, he is one of the best coaches I think in our section, if not the state. He's humble, so he wouldn't agree, but I mean, having him as my mentor has been one of the best things to happen to me as a coach, because he's taken me under his wing, and we've built a great relationship. And I'm really lucky to be in the position I am and having the opportunities he's allowed me to have.
It's amazing how much growth you can make, and like you said, it's amazing how much you learn from coaches or others who aren't even like deliberately trying to teach you. They're just talking and they're just saying things, and all of a sudden you're like learning all this stuff, and to them, they don't even realize like how much they're teaching you. They're just talking coaching, and I remember just absorbing everything, right? And just
Yeah,
taking it all
exactly.
in. That's great. We touched on this a little bit earlier, but again, I wanted to address this specifically. Being a freshman coach requires a lot of patience, and requires a certain type of attitude in order to be able to handle a lot of the mistakes and a lot of the things that come with not just basketball, but also with maybe the maturity levels in some cases of freshmen, 14, 15-year-olds. So how have you learned and grown, especially with the COVID situation you had last year, to keep your patience and to stay focused on the end result? What do you kind of do to kind of self-regulate and keep yourself on track?
Yeah, I really noticed, especially that last week when we were down so many of our guys. When I'm in a calmer and like level-headed state where I'm not barking at the refs and I'm not barking at them. And last year was difficult because, and I'm sure you noticed, like when you have a mask on, it's hard for them to hear you.
Yeah.
So it sounds like you're screaming at them, but you're trying to actually coach them, but they're saying they can't hear you. So now you're like screaming basically. And it sounded a lot worse than I think I intended to. But at the same time, I need to, when I'm level headed and I'm calm, they bring that same type of energy. And
Yeah.
when they're freshmen, especially, they're taking on kind of the role of their coach. If you have a lot of energy, they're gonna have a lot of energy. If you're upset, you're gonna hear the guys on the bench next to you being upset too. And uh, being positive is very important, especially when you're coaching at ninth grade, I think, because they, they're learning just as much as you are, if not more. And they, you're the coach, and they're gonna kind of embody the personality that you have as players. And you have to really I have to especially be better about, in those end of game situations, not, when your heart's racing and it's that 4-point game and you may beat a team you haven't beaten and you really want to. Sometimes those end of game situations get emotional. But last week, and we were playing a couple teams that we had beaten, but when you're down some of your top guys, you don't know what to expect. But being level-headed, and they brought that type of energy out there. They were really calm and collected, and when the game was getting closer, somebody stepped up and made a shot because they were just calm and collected, and it was really fun to see. And that's how I really learned, my coaching style. It's not going to change from the energy standpoint.
Mm-hmm.
If there's an and one or a big basket, I'm gonna jump up and I'm gonna celebrate, because that's the type of coach I am. I'm very passionate about it, and I just like having that type of energy.
Yeah.
But being able to keep myself relaxed and calm at end of games, or if we're not getting calls that we think we should, just being able to go up to a ref and talk to them, compared to having to pull off my mask and say, "Hey, ref," and scream at them when you actually just want to talk to them. Being able to just be calm in those situations is very important, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a growing process with that as well. And like you have to, I think that's one of the really interesting things too, to just sort of think about is, coaching at the freshman level, like your players, maybe more than anyone, your youngest players kind of need a coach who's like really composed and really gonna, be kind of a steady force, because they might have a lot of jitters. They might be really nervous because, they're freshmen, maybe playing at high school for the first time, that they might need that coach there who's like got everything under control, who's calm, who's going to kind of settle things down. And it might be a little reassuring for them to know that they have that kind of adult there who's, in a sense, like got it taken care of, and they can just focus on playing rather than, worried about the way their coach is acting or the way, their coach is handling things.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's definitely tricky. I'll say that for sure. It's definitely not something that I don't know if comes natural, but there's a big learning curve of that. But I think once you learn that and you sort of keep yourself calm and you really focus on the teaching aspect, which is what I think you focus on, then it's like, all right, focus on the teaching, we'll focus on the learning, and then we'll get better. And at the end of the day, right, as you said, nobody really knows what the freshman record is, so it's not as big of a deal as it may seem in the moment. Yeah, you want to win, but then at the end of the day, well, it is the freshman level, and probably nobody's talking about our game at the end of the year. I know nobody was talking about ours at the end of the day.
Yeah, exactly.
All righty, Coach. To wrap up, there is a couple of questions that I like to ask every guest. And so I'll go ahead and start here with this first one. Thinking back on your coaching career, whether it's coaching freshmen or your work with AAU or whatever the situation may be, what is a moment from your coaching career that you think others listening would be able to learn from?
Um, I would say probably, getting the right people in your life as a coach. So like I said, I was very fortunate to have the varsity coach that I have who mentors me and helps me. But I also have another mentor. His name's Tim, and he really is so beneficial for me when I have a question. He's a great basketball mind as well, and
Mm-hmm.
he was a part of one of our state teams that won state back in um, made. We had a period there where we were going to state almost every year, and he was a part of that coaching staff. So having him there to, if there's a game where we're struggling just bad and I don't have the answers, I'll call him, and he watches all the games and he tells me, he's like, you got to have this happen, or you got to do this. And he both him and the varsity coach, they both hold me accountable, but in a constructive way where they're not going to tear me down if I didn't call a timeout at the end of the game, or they're not going to beat me up for getting after a ref over a bad call. They're going to just say, in this situation, this is what you have to do to be successful. Or you got to, control yourself a little better, but I understand what you were doing. And having them kind of guide me through this coaching experience, especially for the younger ages. They're really just having those types of guys in your life makes life easier, and it also makes the coaching experience way more enjoyable.
Yeah.
Because they'll tell you when you're struggling, but then they'll celebrate with you when your team's doing well, and they notice when the team's like from the beginning of the year to the end of the year, and having that reassurance that you're doing a good job, and your team's improved from like drastically from the beginning of the year keeps the long season, like keeps you really level headed and keeps you excited.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that sometimes, coaching, it's really interesting. Like coaching can potentially be like a very like isolating position, or it can be very easy to get like kind of lost in your own head, and like you all of a sudden you start spiraling a little bit because you're kind of thinking about all these things maybe necessary that you're doing wrong, or all of the things you want to get better in, and all these other things. And sometimes it's nice to just have somebody there along who's just going to sort of keep you on track, let you know that like things are going well, and kind of get you back into reality. Because I know for me, I've been in situations where I just get lost in my own head, and somebody has to kind of pull me up and be like, hey, like this is actually what's going on. Like things are actually a lot better than you might think they are in your head.
Yeah. And it's just nice, like being able to have someone tell you, you messed up here, and that
Sure.
keeps you humble. Because
Absolutely.
if you have a successful team and you're winning a lot, sometimes it's easy to think you're good at this job. But in all honesty, there are great coaches out there, but we're never going to be the best, because there's always something different you can learn from every game. And having those types of coaches that I have around me, being able to teach me, like, yeah, we might have won a game by 20 points, but this happened right here where it kind of doesn't reflect well on the program, or it doesn't reflect well on me. That is the type of people you need to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. I couldn't put that in any better words. No, that's very well put. Awesome. To wrap up, Coach, I give every guest what I call a 60-second soapbox, but I never start the timer. This is your platform to get out a final thought, final message, just a closing idea that you want to leave the listeners to think about. So I'm going to go ahead and open up the floor to you, and I'm going to let you take it away from here.
Yeah. So my life journey has been a little different than some people, but when I was in middle school, I was sexually assaulted a few times, and didn't really hit me until I got to the high school ages, where it started to like come back, and I was, constant nightmares, and it kind of affected who I was as a person, where I wasn't a trusting person, and I was just not a great person for a few years there. And when I started coaching the class of 2023 specifically, it's kind of where things started to get better. Now, it took a while, and I had some mental health issues, and ended up getting a therapist. And my therapist said, when you're happiest, sit back and really like ask yourself why. And I realized when I was coaching this group a couple years ago, I think I was 2 years ago in the summer, when I was coaching that class of 2023 in a tournament, just seeing them laughing and just being around them, it really put a lot of things into perspective for me. And specifically, I have, a few of them have quit now to, pursue football or whatever it may be. But that class, all of them in that 8th grade class that I had, really, really are special to me. But I've had 5 really ride out the last few years with me. The coach's son, Brady, he's like my little brother. He holds me accountable a lot. And he's also one of those kids where you can learn a lot from him, and from just being around a player like that who's so hardworking. He got me in better shape. He's just one of those kids that when you're around him, it's hard not to laugh and be happy. And then another one, Nick Wozni, he's just a hard worker, and his family. I've coached his older brother and his younger sister and him, which is cool to say. And his parents have helped me through a lot, and are it's just one of those families that is really nice to have. And Aaron Stevens, Caden Peters, and Kyler Lamb, those 3, they've been with me now for the last 5 years or 4 years. And every single year, I just remember how lucky I am to have them, and how much I was able to learn from them. And basically, they saved my life from whatever path I was going to go on. I don't know what it was, but they were able to, being around them made me realize what I wanted to do with my life. And that was be a coach, for one, and how that brought out a passion in me I never thought I would have. And along with that, I was able to get a job where I'm working at a rehab facility, and it's a special job that I don't think a lot of people have the patience for. And they turned my life around, where I wasn't just I'm not just like that college kid that people used to see. Now I'm this adult who really wants to make a difference, no matter what that may be. And one part of being a successful 9th grade coach, and I think I've succeeded at that, is how are the players around me outside of basketball? Are they intimidated to come up to me? Or are they comfortable to come up to me and laugh with me and come to me for advice whatever that may be? If that's a girlfriend, if that's whatever it is, and they do that. And that made me realize, like, I am one of the luckiest guys in the world to have that group who was able to flip my life around and save me from whatever it was. And then this summer, being around that senior class and the junior class together was like the moment where I was just like, I am finally happy. Like, this is what happiness is, where I'm waking up every day and I know I'm doing the right thing. I'm improving I'm trying to improve from how I was the day before. There's going to be slip ups. There's going to be moments where you act out of character, but at the end of the day, you wake up in the morning and you smile. That's how you know you're happy. And if it wasn't for that group in the senior class this year, I don't know where I would be. And I'm just very grateful to have them. And Coach Herber, he's changed my life for the better. And I'm just I can't put into words how like incredibly grateful I am to have those kids in my life.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that. I know that that's sometimes a tough thing to bring about and talk about, but to hear about, where those experiences and how things have worked out for you now and the journey that you're still on. I think that's a really awesome story, and it's really great to see how things like basketball and coaching can not just make such an effect on people who play, but also coaches themselves and their growth and their journey as people. So I really appreciate that you shared that. That was awesome. And I want to thank you for spending some time, Coach, talking about your program, kind of sharing your journey, sharing your story, and talking about the very interesting and also very rewarding world of coaching ninth grade basketball. So thank you again for that. Hopefully, the bulk of this COVID stuff is behind us, and you can have a full season that you can just fully focus on and focus on your kids and getting them better one day at a time. So, Coach Veenhuis, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure having this conversation. Good luck going forward, Coach.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for all you do with this podcast. It's great to listen to.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, guys, for listening. This was another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast, and we will see you guys next time.
Thank you for listening to another edition of the Basketball Teacher Podcast. Make sure to connect with us on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, or reach us directly through email at basketballteacherpodcast@gmail.com. Take care, be safe, and we'll see you next time.